Dinosaurs. The most fantastic animals in the history of life on Earth. And yet their extinction remains a mystery. Here at New York City's Museum of Natural History, visitors are greeted by an imposing prehistoric creature. Dinosaurs, whose name means heavy lizard, stretched a staggering 80 feet long and stood as tall as a 5-story building. This enormous plant-eating dinosaur lived during the Jurassic period some 150 million years ago. At the time, dense forests up to 300 feet tall blanketed the Earth. Dinosaurs consumed huge quantities of leaves from these giant stands. Throughout the ages, animals of every shape and size have relied on plants for sustenance. Whenever new flora appear, the effect on the animal kingdom can be dramatic. In the rise and fall of dinosaurs, the evolution of plants played a surprisingly significant role. Earth, 500 million years ago, was a place of striking contrasts. Long before the first four-legged creature ventured onto shore, before dinosaurs were even a dream, Earth was a barren wasteland. But the ocean teemed with plants and animals of all shapes and sizes. Beyond the water's edge, no living thing could survive. But these lifeless land masses would soon witness change. Vast islands of rock and sand collided again and again, creating larger continents. The collisions thrust mounds of earth upward through the planet's fault lines. Over time, these rising hills would evolve into the world's great mountain ranges. These lofty giants caused major shifts in the climate. The deluges carved winding paths through mountainsides, converging into powerful bodies of water. These freshwater rivers were new geological phenomena, neither land nor sea. In time, our sea-dwelling ancestors would feel their lure and make their next evolutionary move. Throughout Earth's history, plants have always been a step ahead of animals. About 400 million years ago, plants began to sprout along the water's edge. In time, insects and the common ancestor to both dinosaurs and humans, amphibians, began to populate this new green landscape. 50 million years after their arrival, a few simple plants had evolved into lush forests, habitats that would lure the first curious river creature onto land. But these hardy giants could survive and breed only in proximity to water. The trees were actually tree ferns with stems and leaves that reproduced through spores. Earth's early trees had no flowers or seeds. Vegetation had yet to appear further inland, so animal life was also confined to the shores. The Badlands of Arizona. Hidden in this desolate landscape are some of the earliest fossils of plants that moved inland. This giant tree has kept a lonely vigil here for millions of years. But in its day, it was a pioneer of sorts. Born on the wind, it arrived at this spot as seed. This is a 320 million year old plant fossil, its round seed harboring a tree. Because trees had deep roots, they could weather many seasons even on arid land. Over the course of history, many plants, even the spectacular tree ferns, faded from record. But a new class of plants, the gymnosperms, was on the rise. These were plants with exposed seeds, usually contained in a type of cone. Gymnosperms developed a new method of reproduction. Their seeds were fertilized by clouds of wind-blown pollen that settled on the female reproductive organ, the pistil. Plants like these conifers could now proliferate inland, awaiting the day of the creature that would rule the forest for years, the dinosaur. 230 million years ago, during the Triassic period, when the first dinosaurs would appear, the planet underwent another major transformation. The supercontinent of Pangaea began to break apart. In the wake of continued violent volcanic activity, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 4 to 8-fold what it is today. For plants that photosynthesize using sunlight and carbon dioxide, this was an ideal environment. Back in the Triassic Age, North America's forests probably looked a lot like this. Enormous trees, dense with foliage, stretching toward the sunlight. Land that for eons lay exposed to the sun's harsh rays now rested under a protective canopy. Deep roots collected water, and the forest prospered. The new plant life was an attractive food source for the herbivores that were populating land's interior, and later, the meat-eating reptiles that preyed on them. Among these distant relatives of Ichthyostega, the first creature to set foot on land, were the world's first dinosaurs. This Triassic lizard dates back 225 million years. Lacking the sharp teeth of its carnivorous kin, it's considered to be one of the earliest plant-eating dinosaurs. This tiny creature, less than 3 feet long, was less than ferocious. But over nearly 50 million years, the small dinosaurs began to grow in stature and design. From grazers to high browsers, their size reflected a wide range of feeding adaptations. The reign of the dinosaur began in the planet's great forests. Dinosaurs of fantastic proportion had evolved perhaps to take advantage of the plentiful food supply in the forest canopy. Unlike reptiles, dinosaurs walked on sturdy legs that allowed them to take long, efficient strides and supported their enormous body weight, especially while feeding. By developing longer necks, the Barosaurus and other sauropods could feast on leaves in the treetops beyond the reach of other animals. The sauropods had extremely crude dental structures, long and narrow peg-like teeth. Without molars like animals that evolved later on, these dinosaurs couldn't grind their food.
Plant-eating dinosaurs in the Jurassic period swallowed stones quite regularly to help them break up the plant material that they swallowed. Sauropods did not want to add too much weight onto the head, and of course teeth are very heavy. So if sauropods were grinding up their food in their mouths, they would have a problem with this because that would mean they would have to have a lot of teeth in their jaws. The teeth are heavy, and that gives them a balance problem with their long necks. So what sauropods did instead was swallow stones, which went down into possibly a gizzard in the gut region, but certainly into the stomach as well. And the stones would rub together and grind up the plant material.
Barosaurs only used their limited jaws for simple tasks, carrying food from the forest canopy. The gymnosperms of their era had softer leaves than today's conifers. No one knows how much food these huge sauropods had to consume to survive, but their appetites were gargantuan. Scientists estimate that their daily diet may have exceeded a half-ton of vegetation. Grazing voraciously, dinosaurs, with the help of newly arrived insects, were cutting a devastating swath across the landscape. By the end of the Jurassic period, more than 10 varieties of sauropods and a range of carnivorous dinosaurs roamed the North American continent. While browsing dinosaurs grew in size and range, plants were undergoing their own evolutionary breakthrough. This is Westwater Canyon in Utah. Ancient plant fossils of an entirely new variety have surfaced here. Neither a tree fern nor a gymnosperm, these plants had oval-shaped leaves. Their arrival would revolutionize the plant kingdom and, in time, alter the ecology of the earth.
Yeah, that looks good. That's fine. Now, where is this from?
Dr. Peter Crane, a biologist with Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History, has been sifting through layers of time, studying the origins of this great change. Rocks from the Utah desert are thoroughly washed in water, then gradually dissolved with weak acid to separate stone from plant life. Soon, a tiny flower petal shaped like a tulip emerges. The unlikely catalyst of major change in the Earth's ecology, the angiosperm, or flowering plant. The ancestor of the modern-day magnolia may be the earliest flower on record. Inside the flower, a tiny gold bug coming out of the pupal stage. It's likely that relatives of this insect contributed to the revolution of flowering plants. Jurassic forests provided a sumptuous table for the goldbug and other new insect life. Pollen from flowering plants drifted through the forest like a soft rain. As the tiny insect moved from plant to plant, pollen stuck to its legs and was delivered to the flower's reproductive organs, or pistils, to form new seed. With the help of the goldbug, flowers spread across the landscape. Plants that received enough pollen developed a range of distinctive colors, shapes, and scents to attract more insects. In his outdoor laboratory, Cornell University biologist Dr. Carl Nicholas observes nature's age-old alliances at work. He believes that Earth's early plants and insects formed relationships for the same reason: mutual survival.
Insect pollination allows a plant to transport pollen from one individual to the next, using the brain of the insect to identify the same kind of plant as the donor of the pollen. So, for example, you can have angiosperms that are separated by many miles, two flowering plants of the same species, separated by many miles, and the insect can transport pollen over that mileage. Plants can't move, but insects can. Gymnosperms tend to rely on wind for transport of pollen, so they can transport their pollen only a short, relatively shorter distance. So you can get widely scattered angiosperms that are still reproductively successful. If you widely scatter pine trees, they're not as reproductively successful.
The new flowering angiosperms had another advantage over other plants: the speed at which they reproduced. Gymnosperms, like cedars and pines, pollinated on the wind, had gained an evolutionary foothold millions of years earlier. But once their pollen reached the pistil, it took a full 6 months to a year for the fertilization process to complete. The new flowering plants were dramatically more efficient. Once the pollen grains reach the stigma or opening on the pistil, they germinate, extending a pollen tube to deliver sperm to the ovary. Fertilization takes only 3 minutes after an infusion of pollen. Even the slowest of plants can fertilize within 24 hours.
During the Cretaceous, for the very first time, there was a partnership that was established between flowering plants and insects. Before that time, it was an antagonistic relationship. The insects were eating the plants. But with the evolution of flowering plants, a kind of hand-and-glove relationship began to evolve. Flowers started changing their reproductive structures to accommodate the insects that were visiting them, and insects were beginning to change their morphology, their shape, to accommodate the visiting of flowers.
Nectar produced by flowering plants was a powerful lure for their partners in evolution. New insects like bees and butterflies appeared, and with them, new methods of pollination. Only one type of bee can help fertilize this ginger plant. Using its long tongue, it skillfully opens the petals of this flower. Pollen inside sticks to the bee's head and is later delivered to other flowers. The bee, in turn, is rewarded with nectar, off limits to other species. Through co-evolution, a specialized one-on-one relationship between flowering plant and bee is established. The cooperative effort produced an explosion of insects and flora of virtually infinite texture and design. While dinosaurs may have dominated the ancient forests, insects and plants working together would survive the ages. Flowering plants soon dominated the temperate regions of the North American continent, and gymnosperms receded further north. As forests decline, Jurassic trees evolved defenses such as spiny leaves and bitter poisons in an attempt to stave off the grazing dinosaurs. But the slow-growing conifers could not compete with the burgeoning family of angiosperms. The success of these prolific plants may have pushed the barosaur to the brink of extinction. Layers of history reflect these changes. Cornell's Dr. Nicholas has collected more than 18,000 plant and insect specimens from around the world. These ancient fossils tell the story of life's evolutionary struggle.
It's not just that animals eat plants, it's not that plants rely on some animals for their reproductive biology, but the entire ecosystem depends on very fragile linkages between different types of plants and animals, animals and animals. When we see changes in an ecosystem on a vast level like we do during the Cretaceous, there were many changes in the environment that were going on, and consequently there could have been many factors that were contributing to the extinction of dinosaurs and at the same time the rise of angiosperms.
No change could have been more dramatic for the dinosaur than the decline of Earth's great conifer forests. Populations that had lived for millions of years on nature's bounty dwindled in the wake of change. The conifers that remain must have evolved their own survival strategies, perhaps acquiring tougher foliage the weak-jawed dinosaurs were not equipped to consume. The reasons for their extinction continue to baffle scientists. But an extensive fossil record shows that the once mighty Barosaurus vanished completely from the North American continent 130 million years ago. More than 10 different species of dinosaurs left their footprints here during the Jurassic period. By the Cretaceous, when flowering plants exploded onto the scene, all but one had become an ecological casualty. Alaska's North Slope. During much of the year, this land bordering the Arctic Ocean is blanketed by snow and ice. Beneath the permafrost are some of the world's largest oil reserves. But there are other riches buried here. Hidden in the sedimentary layers are dinosaur fossils, a prehistoric graveyard that has attracted the attention of Dr. Elizabeth Browers of the U.S. Geological Survey and Dr. Ralph Taggart of Michigan State University. Together, they have unearthed fossils from the strata dating back to a period after the birth of angiosperms. Though not as extreme as today, the Arctic winter back then was dark and cold, temperatures dropping to freezing. The discovery of fossils here has overturned the long-held notion dinosaurs thrived only in temperate zones.
Well, what kind of plants is it that's making up this organic horizon?
Well, that you can't tell there because it's too dark, but we could whack away at it.
The purpose of this scientific expedition is to learn why some dinosaurs came to inhabit such a remote and inhospitable place.
Oh, look at this. Conifer needles. Look at them.
Oh, yeah.
They're
Look,
all through the rock.
there's no no leaves at all?
No,
Just
no,
the needles?
no broadleaves. You know, that's the curious thing because that would be what these dinosaurs would have to eat. The hadrosaurs, of course, are plant eaters.
Yeah. We would estimate that temperatures during the time that these animals were living, and the conifers as well, was about 6 to 8 degrees centigrade, mean annual temperature. And also, because we're at such a high latitude, we had very dark winters. These conifers are in the same bed as the hadrosaurs, and there are no other plants associated. There are no flowering plants, no angiosperms, only this dominance of conifers. It's clear that the hadrosaurs had to be eating the conifers, and this is how they survived throughout the year, especially during the winter as well. This right here is what I've been looking for. It's a little bit gray, it's a light gray color, when it's weathering, but you see when it's fresh, it's very dark and it's full of organic material, a lot of plant material.
Well, what are those light-colored pieces?
Oh, look at this.
Oh.
Here's a piece of a hadrosaur.
Hey.
This is a hadrosaur.
What is it?
Wow, a hadrosaur toe bone.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Spectacular
that.
preservation. You see how good that is?
What we're
Oh.
dealing with here is really a history. It's almost as if somebody had put together in a book the history of this some point on this ancient Alaskan landscape. So at this, down here in our book, all the pages are in the form of layers of mud that are coming in, probably with seasonal floods from the neighboring river. And those, during that time, mostly plant debris, mostly conifer needles was accumulating. As we move later in time and these deposits thicken up, this is no longer just sort of accumulating mud and leaf litter. It's almost a swampy area, a little back swamp away from the main channel in which there was a great deal of organic material accumulating, almost a coal. If there was more organic material, this would almost be a coal. But this is the environment where the dinosaur bones were sweeping in. Now this also has conifer needles in it, but they're not as concentrated as the conifer needles in the other deposits, and they're harder to see because it's against a very, very dark background. So the basic vegetation was the same, but this is at this point in the history of this one spot that we're standing on, now dinosaur bones were washing into this site.
The dinosaur discovered in Alaska is a plant-eating hadrosaur called Edmontosaurus, which first appeared around the mid-Cretaceous. Fossils of Edmontosaurus have surfaced in locations across North America. This dinosaur, it seems, filled the evolutionary niche left by the larger sauropods. Edmontosaurus was a duck-billed dinosaur, about half the size of the Barosaurus. Why had this animal traveled so far north? The answer, according to Dr. Taggart, may lie with the plant fossils discovered near Edmontosaurus.
The plants that are preserved in the rocks are the same kind of conifers that we find in the stomachs of dinosaur mummies from Alberta, mummified dinosaurs from Wyoming. Clearly the dinosaurs up here must have been preferentially eating this kind of vegetation. Now the fascinating thing is that if they were as selective every place else in the world, when this big change in plants was taking place and the flowering plants were basically displacing the conifers almost every place else in the world, if they continued to be as selective as they must have been up here on the Arctic slope of Alaska, then dinosaur populations worldwide were in very, very serious trouble.
During the Cretaceous, angiosperms from warm equatorial countries prospered everywhere, while conifers were dominant only in polar regions. Without an ample food supply, Edmontosaurus was forced to migrate from its temperate home toward conifers in the Arctic reaches. For the large-bodied dinosaurs, the days of bounty had drawn to a close. Alberta, Canada. In this strangely sculpted landscape, the final chapters of the dinosaur age unfold. The Red Deer River, also known as the River of Time. The layers of sediment lining its banks date from the last 100 million years of the dinosaur. From this region came fossils of a new type of plant-eating dinosaur. This three-horned dinosaur, Triceratops, was one of the ceratopsians, or horn-faced dinosaurs, that dominated the late Cretaceous era. Heavily armored and somewhat resembling today's rhinoceros, Triceratops measured 30 feet long and weighed up to 6 tons. But on the evolutionary ladder, this creature never reached the status of its predecessor, Barosaurus.
From what we understand about this group of animals, they were of relatively low stature, kind of a grazing animal in large herds, very much like cattle. Everything that we can see suggests that they browsed and fed off of low vegetation. And towards the end of the Mesozoic, during the Cretaceous, the lowest vegetation would be probably towards the end of the Cretaceous angiosperms. The ceratopians probably just ate and ate and ate, migrating over their habitat as they removed the food from one location, moving on to another.
With its 3 menacing horns, even the most formidable predators steered clear of the Triceratops as it foraged for food. But what distinguishes Triceratops in the historical record was its ability to adapt where others couldn't. At last, a dinosaur that could feed on flowering plants and grasses. In this landscape full of life, it is hard to imagine that the dinosaur age was fading. Meanwhile, in the shadow of the prospering Triceratops, angiosperms had begun to seek new partners in evolution. On a Cretaceous night, mammals, our ancestors, came alive at the foot of the sleeping Triceratops. The earliest mammals were small, about the size of a mouse. Still only bit players in Earth's evolutionary drama, these tiny animals moved about at night to avoid predators. Almost all mammals until then had fed on insects. But as angiosperms gained more ground, mammals expanded their diet. As a result of this change, flowering plants were dispersed to an even larger domain. Summer in Hokkaido, the northernmost island in Japan. The season when sweetbriar blossom over the countryside. Sweetbriar are relatives of the planet's early fruit-bearing plants. By responding quickly to evolutionary pressures, angiosperms won the cooperation of other species. Their first triumph, attracting insects who would distribute their seed. Now, with the advent of fruit-bearing plants, came new partners in evolution, mammals. Mammals disperse the fruit seeds to places they may never have reached otherwise. Both plants and animals benefited from this exchange. Ecologist Dr. Yumoto of Japan's Kobe University has been conducting field research in Southeast Asia and Africa to study how plants and animals interact. Yumoto has observed the symbiotic connection between flowering plants and mammals in tropical rainforests. Small fruit consumed by small animals like squirrels. Large fruit that attracts monkeys and chimpanzees. Co-evolution to meet specific needs. As life becomes more complex, flowering plants and animals develop more exclusive relationships with one another. As large as a football, this giant fruit is a treat for the modern elephant. But if elephants can feast on angiosperms, why not other large creatures like dinosaurs?
もし恐竜というのが種子散布をして
If dinosaurs had formed a symbiosis with plants by spreading seeds and contributing to their reproductive process, then plants would certainly have made an adaptive effort to create large fruits to have their seeds dispersed more efficiently by them.
そういう適応があったはずです。
But there is no evidence from existing fossils, either of plants or dinosaurs, that indicate there was ever a plant that benefited from such a relationship with dinosaurs.
ですから
So, as angiosperms established an intimate relationship with mammals, or as the close interaction emerged between angiosperms and insects, their pollen agent,
というそういう中から
there's a good possibility that dinosaurs were left out of the game and lost footing in the ecological system.
Without enough food, the planet's remaining dinosaurs would slowly die out. And their 160 million year reign finally come to an end. Despite lifetimes of research by paleontologists, no one knows the exact cause of the dinosaurs' mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period. But it's now thought that most dinosaurs were in decline at the time of a cosmic collision 65 million years ago. A comet or asteroid 6 miles wide struck the Earth with the force of 100 million megatons. The impact created a worldwide firestorm and hurled a cloud of dust and debris into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun. For many seasons, the planet appeared lifeless. In this never-ending winter, plant life vanished, and with it, plant eaters and their predators. The dinosaurs could not withstand this final blow. But enough plants and animals managed to survive this age of darkness. Mammals, that for millions of years had lived in the shadow of the dinosaur, could fill the evolutionary niches left behind. At last, winter subsided, giving way to sunlight and fresh signs of life. With the demise of the dinosaurs, mammals flourished in every corner of the globe. The Earth found a new rhythm. And an evolutionary dance with different partners had begun. Versatile creatures would appear, animals that could climb or run or forage skillfully in their new habitat. The first of a long line, a lineage that would one day include the family of man. all owe their existence in some measure to a cooperative relationship with plants. We may never fully understand why dinosaurs disappeared from the planet, while their fellow species, flowering plants, insects, and mammals, flourished. Larger than life, dinosaurs may have been victimized by their size, the very trait that assured their sovereignty for 160 million years. In a twist of fate, dinosaurs, unable to change with their environment, were driven to extinction not by a predator, but by the most powerful and random force of all, the force of nature.